A hit Saturday morning cartoon that was only a tiny indicator of the fantastic heights of popularity that one person had achieved in an incredibly short time. A heroic adventure series that barely needed to embellish the source of its inspiration and the person whose name was on the show. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of Mr. T, the animated series. Thank you to 80stees.com for sponsoring this video. Click the link in the description below and use code TOYGALAXY to get 30% off your order today. 80stees.com is your source for t-shirts inspired by all things pop culture from the 1980s, which, to be honest, is all things still pop culture now in the 2020s. We are in the future and we shaped it in our own image. 80s movies tees, 80s cartoon tees, video games, superheroes, music, wrestling, holidays. Honestly, it's not even limited to just the 80s. There's plenty of stuff from the 70s, the 90s, and the 2000s that you can wear in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. Heck, my dad is 71 and I got him this G.I. Joe bazooka jersey because he's a big New England Patriots fan. It's something we can enjoy together. From Transformers to Dungeons & Dragons, from Bruce Lee to Napoleon Dynamite, shirts range from soft to, ooh, that's soft. Free worldwide shipping on orders $50 and up. Click the link below and use code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order today. Again, that's code TOYGALAXY for 30% off your order. Thanks again to 80stees.com. Mr. T is an animated series produced by Ruby Spears Productions that ran for 30 episodes over 3 seasons from September of 1983 to October of 1985. You will not be surprised to hear that it starred Mr. T as Mr. T. You may be surprised to hear that it featured a little kid who did his best to act like Mr. T and a dog that tried to look like Mr. T. Mr. T coaches a traveling high school gymnastics team that can't help but pull double duty as detectives, solving mysteries that inevitably cross their path. Mr. T, along with bus driver Ms. Bisbee, do their best to mentor the young adults through the trials and tribulations of competitive sports, adolescence, and the shortcomings of law enforcement. It's a familiar premise, essentially Scooby-Doo, but instead of Shaggy and Scooby-Doo, it's Mr. T. Jeff, Woody, Robin, and Kim make up the core of both the gymnastics squad and the crime-fighting unit. Robin's younger brother Spike acts as an avatar for the kids who are watching, as well as an example of the influence that Mr. T has on the suburban kids of America. Dozer, same, but dog. The mysteries they solve are frequently real crimes that are certainly dangerous, but watered down to the point where viewers can accept that these crimes can be solved by high school kids and a dog with a mohawk. Thwarted by handsprings, split jumps, and back layouts, the real crime is that the judges never get to see some of this team's best work. Each episode opens and closes with a live-action segment, further capitalizing on the phenomenon of Mr. T. He introduces the themes of the episode at the beginning, then wraps it all up with a reinforcement of the message. Things like, treat people with respect, work hard, don't procrastinate, watch your weight, but don't overdo it. Mr. T is a different kind of public personality. He is an actor, but in general, the part he is playing in movies and TV shows is usually just barely a degree off from who he really is. The person Mr. T is so much bigger than any role he attempts to inhabit. You cast Mr. T because you want Mr. T. Mr. T grew up in Chicago, Illinois, but he wasn't born Mr. T. A desire to control his own life in a world beyond his control created a different path. Being the youngest of 12 children can drive you to find new ways to be an individual. His father, a minister, left the family when Mr. T was only 5 years old. In 1970, when he turned 18, Mr. T officially changed his name from Lawrence Thoreau to Mr. T. As he tells the story, he had grown up in a world dominated by white people that had nothing but contempt for people like him. In his own words, I think about my father being called boy, my uncle being called boy, my brother coming back from Vietnam and being called boy. So I questioned myself, what does a black man have to do before he's given respect as a man? So when I was 18 years old, when I was old enough to fight and die for my country, old enough to drink, old enough to vote, I said I was old enough to be called a man. I self-ordained myself Mr. T, so the first word out of everybody's mouth is Mr. In 1975, Mr. T joined the U.S. Army, serving as a military police officer. After that, he tried out for the Green Bay Packers, but didn't make the cut. Instead, he used his physical stature, his presence, in a job similar to that of his military service as a bouncer for a Chicago dance club called Dingbats. Many of the signature Mr. T attributes were developed during this time. The gold chains were souvenirs from club patrons who had either left them behind or surrendered them during an altercation. Mr. T would wear them like a walking lost and found. The haircut, he says, was inspired by the Mandinka warriors of West Africa. The chains and bracelets he would eventually claim represented the chains that brought his ancestors to this country and then held them down. All of it together a powerful, carefully constructed visual statement before it became a cartoon character. Being the doorman for the club was a great place to build his resume as a mediating force who looked like he would hurt you, but was more interested in keeping the peace. A charming nuclear deterrent. From bouncer to bodyguard, for nearly a decade, Mr. T protected the stars, including people like boxer Leon Spinks, who you would have thought could protect himself. Mr. T's reputation as the tough guy was established, but it still had a way to go before the public knew about him.
New Mr. T breakfast cereal. The cereal with a dynamite taste presents Mr. T, talk number 1.
Hello, Mr. T here, and today I'm talking school. Getting an education. You just gotta have it, kids. So study hard, listen to the teachers, and learn something new every day. You'll be a better person. And remember, do the best you can every day.
Mr. T, the delicious, crispy sweet corn and oat cereal, part of a good breakfast.
But remember, you need the whole breakfast to do your best every day.
Mr. T got national attention in 1980 when he appeared in the World's Toughest Bouncer competition, featuring events like throwing people, breaking down doors, and boxing. It was part of a series on NBC called Games People Play. He won the title 2 years in a row. It was his physical prowess and charisma that caught the eye of a casting director and Sylvester Stallone that led to his inclusion in Rocky III as Clubber Lang. The breakout role firmly cemented in the eyes of the public what Mr. T was all about. Big, tough, charismatic guy. Even if he was the villain, audiences loved him. Rocky III also gave him his trademark "I pity the fool" tagline. As Clubber Lang in the film, he is asked if he hates Rocky Balboa, to which he replies, "No, I don't hate Balboa, but I pity the fool." Mr. T would go on to appear in the film Penitentiary 2 in a role written specifically for him, and according to Wikipedia, he was on an episode of, and I'm quoting here, the Canadian sketch comedy series Bizarre, where he fights and eats Super Dave Osborne before accepting a television series role on the A-Team. That's a busy afternoon. Rocky III was released in May of 1982. Mr. T was cast as B.A. Baracus in the A-Team as part of the NBC television network's rise back to ratings dominance under the direction of President Brandon Tartikoff. The A-Team premiered in January of 1983, and by then it was already crystal clear that he was the personality of the moment. Mr. T, the animated series, was created by Steve Gerber and Martin Pasco. Gerber had written comics for both Marvel and DC. He co-created Howard the Duck with Val Mayerick before moving to animation, writing for shows like Plastic Man, Dungeons & Dragons, and Thundar the Barbarian, the latter of which he co-created with Joe Ruby and Ken Spears. Pasco also started in comic books as a writer who had worked on characters like Superman, Wonder Woman, the Justice League, and Dr. Fate for DC, as well as Daredevil, Star Trek, and Swamp Thing for Marvel Comics. He moved to television on shows like Buck Rogers and Black Star. Both creators were working for Ruby Spears Productions when Brandon Tartikoff ordered a cartoon with Mr. T as the star. Ruby Spears and Hanna-Barbera before them had already demonstrated success with cartoons featuring popular live-action stars. Laurel and Hardy, Abbott and Costello, the Harlem Globetrotters, Gary Coleman, Mork and Mindy, Laverne and Shirley, and the Fonz. Pasco and Gerber put together 3 different formats to pitch to NBC for Mr. T, and according to Pasco, none of them were the show that they ended up making. "We did our best, but we couldn't find those original 3 pitches, but Pasco did auction off his copy of the original preliminary development document for Mr. T, so if the winner of that auction happens to be watching this, DM me." Pasco and Gerber were joined by comic book legend Jack Kirby, who happened to be working for Ruby Spears Productions at the time. Disenfranchised with the world of comic books due to what he perceived as the lack of appreciation and compensation for his contributions, Jack had moved into animation. Essentially, Kirby was hired to just draw cool stuff. He had his own desk, and Joe Ruby and Ken Spears did their best to keep him busy. If they didn't have anything for him, he could just draw whatever he wanted to, or not. He's Jack Kirby. The premise of Mr. T is a familiar one because, let's not forget, Joe Ruby and Ken Spears created Scooby-Doo. Kids solving mysteries was a very successful formula that had worked over many years. It also delivered the action series that also stayed within the strict guidelines of standards and practices, which limited the degree of action you could depict. Mr. T, the real person, has always been about helping kids, giving them advice, trying to build up his own Chicago neighborhood to be better than the one he grew up in. Over the course of his career, Mr. T as mentor or coach at a community center or a gymnasium is a common thread. Is it possible that Pascoe and Gerber positioned Mr. T as the coach of a high school gymnastics team because they were creating it just a few years after the US boycotted the 1980 Olympics held in Moscow, during the hyper-nationalistic early years of the Reagan administration when international sports were a symbolic part of the Cold War effort? Is it possible that as the 1984 Olympics approached, the idea of Mr. T as the coach of the gymnastics team was a subconscious wish fulfillment for anxious Americans pinning their hopes on gold medals in a sport that the Russians had, whether legally or not, dominated in the previous Olympics?
Check out the big brain on
Dan Larson.
You're a smart mother.
It is possible, but according to Flint Dilley, who wrote 7 of the 30 episodes of Mr. T, the choice to position Mr. T as the coach of a gymnastics team was likely much less interesting than that. The reality is that it was a safe concept that passed standards and practices, allowed for action and adventure, and hey, kids like doing gymnastics. Same reason Gymkata was a box office hit in 1985. Mr. T aired on Saturdays from 1983 to 1985. Reruns would pop up throughout the 80s, 90s, and 2000s on programming blocks like USA Cartoon Express, Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, and Boomerang. Mr. T's arrival in Hollywood was like an explosion. Licensed stuff with his face and name on it, flying in every direction. Between the A-Team and Mr. T cartoon, you couldn't escape his desire to help you be a better person. Stay off drugs, don't talk to strangers, don't play games with people's feelings. Dolls, action figures, his 1984 rap album called Mr. T's Commandments, children's books, coloring and activity books, stickers, board games, and with the popularity of the cartoon, licensed merchandise tied specifically to those character models like Shrinky Dinks and Mr. T cereal. To be clear, Mr. T cereal was made out of corn, sugar and oats, and sugar, fortified with iron, sugar, and B vitamins and sugar, and compacted into little tiny T shapes coated in sugar. And if that wasn't enough tea for you, reach inside the box and grab a set of Mr. T stickers. Put them on your muscles! Grand Dreams released a Mr. T hardcover annual with cartoon model sheets, short stories, and comic strips featuring Mr. T and the other characters from the animated series in 1984 and 1985. Years later, Now Comics released Mr. T and the T-Force, but that was unrelated to the animated series. Some of the episodes of Mr. T were released on VHS internationally, but T didn't hit DVD until May of 2011. Warner Archive released the first season under the Hanna-Barbera Classics Collection. You can also purchase all 3 seasons digitally on Amazon and iTunes. Mr. T was a hit cartoon for NBC 3 years running and helped to establish a formula for other live-action adaptations that focused on a hot celebrity of the moment: Punky Brewster, Rambo, Chuck Norris, Alf. Mr. T, the cartoon. The way it looks, the way it functions is a snapshot in time. And that simplicity, that innocence in the narrative is something that is hard to connect to today and over the years has been the subject of parody far and wide. But its value is in the depiction of what Mr. T was and how he was perceived. To kids, he really was like a living superhero. And unlike every other show that wants to give a sense of their character being real, Mr. T is real. Beyond voicing the character, it's hard to say that the actual Mr. T wouldn't at least try to do the things that animated Mr. T does in those same situations. Punching sharks and throwing alligators. Anything to protect the kids and solve the mystery. Thanks for watching. Please hit like, hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. Thank you again to 80stees.com for sponsoring this video, and check us out on Twitch at twitch.tv/toygalaxy. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, if you would like early access to the videos ad-free, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy, and let us know in the comments down below if you've ever been so inspired by a celebrity that you attempted to dress and act like them. My brother and I were such big fans of Michael Jackson back in the day that we both asked for the Beat It jacket one year for Christmas, the one with the zippers all over it, and we got it. He got a black one, I got the red one. It was way too big for me, and I'm sure all the other kids thought I was a weirdo, but that's nothing new. I got really good at moonwalking, but only in socks. Cut.